Hi guys, it's Aoife from Words of Clover and I'm here today to talk about all the books that I read in February. I had another great reading month in February, similar to January, so I have loads of books to talk about. And the first book that I finished since the last time I talked to you was The Break by Katherena Vermette. This is a book that I didn't really have on my radar, and then I saw Mercedes from Mercy's Bookish Musings, and she was raving both about this book and about the book's kind of like a spin-off sequel to the book as well. And just what she talked about when she was talking about the book, just her descriptions and her review of the book made me really want to pick it up. So I managed to reserve it from my library on ebook and I read that at the very start of February. The book is set in Canada and we are following this moment where a woman gets up in the middle of the night because her young child is crying and she's looking after her child, and she looks out of her bedroom window out onto this it's kind of like an area in front of her house where there's no houses, there's not really anything out there, and they call it the break. And when she looks out there, she sees something terrible happen to another person and she calls the police. And when the police arrive, they don't really believe her when she says that she thinks she saw like a serious assault happen to this person. They think that, she's a young mother, she's tired, she was up with her crying child, maybe she wasn't seeing things right, so they don't really take her account seriously. And then we end up going off and meeting a few other characters who all seem to be connected. They're all part of this big family, and kind of bit by bit through all of these characters, chapters and point of views, we learn about who they are, the history of the family, and kind of their history as, I guess, Indigenous people in Canada as well. Connection to the land and the way they've grown up, kind of more, I guess, urban Indigenous as well. And we see the story creep closer and closer to what actually happened out there on the break, who it happened to, and how all these characters are connected, and also how they are connected to the woman who actually witnessed the crime as well, to each other and helping each other through something that is very traumatic for both the person who actually had the thing happen to them, but also for everyone as a whole as well in this family. I don't want to say too much about this book, as I said, because there is like a real art in how things are revealed and how the story all kind of just connects together at one point in the book. But I will say I was definitely really hooked onto the story. There are some really kind of hard bits in terms of, child abuse, people, sexual assault as well. And then the way some of the characters in this book, how they grew up as well, and things that happened to them growing up, and how there is this kind of real generational trauma attached in the story as well. We are actually seeing the point of view of someone who was like the aggressor in the story, which I thought was really interesting, because what was done was it's such a terrible, like, heinous crime, yet when you realize who the perpetrator is, you don't hate them because you've kind of understood a little bit more about who they are, why they are the way they are, and it's a little bit more like, while yes, it was a terrible thing, sometimes there are ways in which you can look at someone who's done a terrible thing and feel empathy for them, even though they've done this thing. So yeah, I thought it was a really good, interesting book. I gave it like a 4.5 out of 5 stars. I really enjoyed it. I would recommend it for people to read if at all what I've said sounds interesting, even though I know I had to be really vague about it. But it was a really well written book. This is a debut novel as well, which I thought was amazing. I definitely want to read the spin-off sequel as well to this book, as I think that'll be a really interesting one to read, especially how this book ends up, and the family we are following in this book and how it's connected to particular characters in this book. I think it'll be really interesting read. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to reading that. The book I read was also another little bit of a grisly one. That's because it was a Karin Slaughter book, which is always tend to be violent and traumatic and grisly and bloody. And this one was Genesis, which is the third book in the Will Trent series. I love the Will Trent series. This is one of my favourite crime series at the moment, and I always am raving about it when I talk about it. In this one, we are following Will again as he comes across this accident. He's in the hospital for a different reason, and then this young woman is brought in. She was knocked down by an elderly couple in a car after running out onto the road, and it's really clear as soon as she's brought into the hospital that the injuries that she has aren't weren't sustained in the car accident, that something had happened to her beforehand. And even though she is really, really badly injured, she can't really speak or say anything, they realise that she is obviously being kept somewhere. Someone has done some really, really awful things. So Will goes out to try and find out what happened. He goes to the scene of the crime, kind of walks around a bit, investigates the area, and they end up finding this kind of like underground pit where it seems this girl was kept and tortured by someone. And they find out that it seems like she probably wasn't alone as well. There might have been another woman there at the same time that she was, so they end up having to obviously go look for this girl before she could be also really badly injured, and they're trying to find this woman while at the same time trying to figure out who did this to these women, and at the same time stop him from taking someone else, because it seems like this is the act of a serial killer or a serial like abuser, I guess, someone who, you know, will always probably have someone else out there that he wants to take and wants to hurt very, very badly. So Will is on this, and we end up finding another character. We end up meeting another character in the hospital at the very, very start, who is actually from the original Karin Slaughter series, the Grant County series, which is like a spin-off series to the Will Trent. I would always say to read all of the Grant County series before you read the Will Trent series, otherwise you would be massively spoiled in this book, particularly about events that happened at the end of the Grant County series. We are following a character who was one of the main characters in that series, and we are following them again and how they loop into this story, and how they are going to become an integral part of this series. And I obviously don't know, I don't want to say who it is because I do think it would be a bit of a spoiler if I even said who it was. But I was really, really happy to see this character again. I have a little bit of trauma myself from what happened at the end of the Grant County series. I don't think I'll ever get over it, but there was actually something really, really lovely about seeing this character again, seeing them brought into this new setting, this kind of new chance as well, of friendship and of like romantic relationships possibly as well, kind of that kind of a little bit more light in their life, and I really, really liked that. I really thought it was really, really lovely to see, and yeah, it was kind of just seeing like an old friend again. So I love the fact that they are going to be part, like a main character in this series, and could be really, really good for our main character in the series, Will. I think they'll be a really good character for him to be friends with, and will be really caring for him as well. So I'm really looking forward to seeing how this series progresses, and I have the fourth one on hold in my library at the moment as well, so I'll be reading that probably very early April once the Irish Readathon is over. But I really enjoyed this one, and I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars. I had a bit of a dud read, unfortunately, and that was Stonefield by Christy Lenzi. This is a book that I've had for a very, very long time on my Kindle from NetGalley, from like years back on NetGalley, and I say it a few times, but I have a lot of like very old titles on NetGalley that I just never got to, which I'm slowly trying to read and review and just like get them off my NetGalley to read list, and this was one of them. This is a YA Wuthering Heights retelling that is set during the American Civil War, and I really liked that concept. I thought it was a really interesting way of retelling Wuthering Heights. And unfortunately, it just didn't do what I wanted to do. It was very, very kind of silly and fast paced. It is very insta-lovey, and the characters of Kathy and kind of the Heathcliff character, who's called Stonefield in this, I just thought like they weren't likable people, but I do think like the original Kathy and Heathcliff, like they're not likable characters, but there's something about the story as a whole that you like to hate them in a way, or you hate. Yeah, I think I don't know whether you hate to like them or you like to hate them, but there's something really appealing about the fact that they aren't likable characters in Wuthering Heights, where in this one, I just thought they just weren't nice characters at all, and I just didn't really like following them, and I thought everything they did was just not very helpful, over the top. I didn't like their interactions with each other. This book could have had a really interesting turn at one point, where kind of the Civil War was getting started, and a lot of the men had left to fight in the war, and the women like the older men were left alone in the town. And I thought that could have had a really interesting turn about how that would have worked, a little bit like kind of like Cold Mountain-esque, if anyone remembers that movie with was it Nicole Kidman and Jude Law, which is actually kind of an interesting movie around this time in history. I thought things could be done really interesting, but it just kind of like glimpsed over it and nothing really was done about it at all. The book was mainly about this relationship with just the backdrop of the American Civil War, and I think they could have done so much more with the American Civil War. They could have made it a much bigger part of the story and could have made the story longer and just filled it out more with a lot more interesting historical moments. But yeah, that didn't happen. So I gave this a 2.5 out of 5 stars, and I wouldn't recommend. Then after that, I read Moonlight and the Pearler's Daughter by Lizzie Pook. This is based in Australia in 1886, and I haven't read too much Australian historical fiction, so I was kind of interested to pick this up. And unfortunately, this one again wasn't one that I thought I would like more than I ended up doing. We're following a girl called Eliza. Yeah, we're following a girl called Eliza whose father kind of owns this like pearling ship, or this pearling crew. His crew come back one day and her father is gone, and it appears that he has gone missing. He went missing out like one day, he was on the ship, the next day he wasn't on the ship, and no one seems to know what happened to him. And everyone's like, well, he must just be presumed dead, he must like, you know, fallen overboard or something happened to him, so he must be dead. And Eliza just like doesn't buy this. She's like, no, like my father wouldn't, like this, that wouldn't happen to my dad, like something else is going on. So she ends up kind of like trying to discover what her father could have been doing. Was there things that he was at before he went out on this trip that could have led to this disappearance? So she kind of starts investigating a little bit into her father's life, and we kind of, through this, we end up finding things that have happened to their family, and kind of like a bit of family history, her relationship with her brother as well, which is a little bit strained. Her brother is a little bit of a mess. He's like an alcoholic and an opium addict, and yeah, he's not doing very well, so we see how that affects her as well. And like, this was fine. I just felt like it took me really like a long time to get into. I don't think it was as exciting as I wanted it to be. And one of the things I couldn't really figure out was why she was so convinced that her dad just didn't have an accident. Like, you know, at this point in time you would think that like accidents did happen, people fell overboard, things happened. And it just didn't make that much sense for me that she would just be like, no, like something else happened. Like he's out there somewhere. It's like, where could he go? They were like literally in the middle of the sea. Like they were on a boat, like in the water. Where would he go? So yeah, the whole thing of like why she was convinced that something else had happened just didn't really make sense to me. I did like some of the history around kind of the indigenous population of the time on this island in Australia, and how they were treated by like the English settlers that would have come, and some of the horrific treatment that they had to like go through. Like there were some things around like diving for pearls, and how they used to make pregnant women dive, like pregnant indigenous women dive for pearls, because they said that they would be able to, I don't know whether it was they were able to go deeper or something because of the pregnancy, I don't know, but obviously like it would be really, really dangerous, and like most of them died, and that was just horrific to learn about. And there were just some other things around the treatment of the population and of children, and children being taken away and stuff like that. That was just, yeah, it was educational, but it was hard to read. And Lizzie does make a point of like really like pointing these like atrocities out, and making sure that you know, she like teaches people about it. So yeah, this was fine, it just wasn't great, so I gave it a 3 out of 5 stars. After that, I read a audiobook, and this one actually surprised me a little bit. It was The Little Bookshop of Love Stories by Jaimie Adams, and this is just a kind of adult contemporary book where we are following a character who ends up winning a bookshop in this like raffle that she bought a ticket for in her kind of favourite local bookstore, kind of near where she grew up. So our main character, Hallie, ends up winning this bookstore, and she's a little bit of like a mess when it comes to like life. She's like in her mid-30s. She's never really had like a really like stable job. She is like useless in the love department, but she really loves reading and she really loves books, but she's never run a bookstore. So when she ends up like literally being given this bookstore, she doesn't really know where to start. And the bookstore itself, while it is lovely and has like a charm to it, it's kind of like, you know, like it's dusty, it's old, the stock is all over the place, and it's full of kind of like crumbly old secondhand books that she needs to sort out. And yeah, it's kind of like it's on its last legs, and she basically is the one that has to try and figure out how to save it. And so she starts doing this, and she ends up getting help from this local artist who comes into the shop all the time, and the two of them kind of form this really lovely friendship, and it obviously blossoms into something a little bit more. And I will say, I have never read a book where two characters have been so perfectly matched for each other. And as soon as he walked in the door, like it was crazy how much they were suited. They were both like real like clumsy people, and the amount of times they fell either onto the floor in front of each other or literally into each other in this book is actually unbelievable. Like, I was reading it on audiobook, so I don't know for sure, but there were literal there was like, most of this book takes place, I guess, in the first almost like a week of the bookstore opening, and then it kind of like fast forwards a little bit to like cover like a few more weeks. But the first like 2 or 3 days where she's like running the bookstore and this guy Dimitri is coming in to help her, the amount of dialogue between them, like they talked so much. And while it's like, it was really, really nice to see as well, like there was a genuine connection like between the two of them. There was like a chemistry there. It wasn't like real like sexy chemistry, but it was just like a really lovely like old-timey romantic chemistry between them. And they talked and talked and talked and talked. There was so much dialogue for me to listen to in the book, and I was like, I don't think I've ever actually like read like a book with a romance that has this much talking between the two characters in it, and they just like really got to know each other. It was like real like soul spilling type of dialogue, and it just kind of amazed me in a way that I was really impressed by it. Like, I really believed in the romance between these two characters, which doesn't always happen. So yeah, I really enjoyed that. Like, there's a lot of things that, like, you know, that are like a little bit like I don't know, like cutesy with this book, and there were some things that were like really, really obvious as well. The third act breakup bit was a little bit over the top. I wasn't really like that keen on it. But overall I did enjoy it. I think this is a book for book lovers. I mean, who wouldn't love to win a bookstore in a gorgeous little like street in the Cotswolds? I mean, I think everyone would. So yeah, this is definitely a book for book lovers. A nice book to read around Valentine's Day as well. So I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars, and I really enjoyed it. After that, I read a dark academia book, and that was The Cloisters by Katy Hayes. We were following a character called Anna who's just finished up her college education, and she knows that she has a I don't know whether it's like a scholarship or like an internship or something. I think she has an internship with or like a summer job with, I think it was like the Met, but then she ends up being brought into this place called the Cloisters, where she ends up with this guy who's like this, I don't know whether he's a professor or like a historian, and herself and this other girl they're kind of like the assistants. He's basically assisting while they're looking into kind of the historical tarot cards and how people used tarot, and if there is this like kind of like old tarot decks and stuff like that, and if there are like, is there any merit in tarot? Is it something that's like just like, you know, kind of kooky stuff, or is it something that can actually like tell you the future, or, you know, determine the path of your life? And they're kind of looking into this, and things are kind of getting very, very intense, particularly between Anna and her new friend Rachel, who's the other girl who she's working with. And things are kind of getting very intense between the two of them, and Rachel is a very intense person, and they're kind of like living and breathing in each other's shadows. Take a bit of a darker turn, and after a while Anna starts wondering if she's like in too deep and what she can do to get, like, she doesn't really know if she wants to get out or not. So like, I enjoyed this. Like, it was kind of like, it wasn't super twisty and turny, but it kind of twisted enough to keep me turning. But yeah, I like, now that I've a couple of weeks away from it, I'm kind of like, I wonder how long the story will like stick in my head. I don't think as maybe dark academia goes, I don't think it was anything extraordinary. Now, I haven't read a lot of dark academia, but it's certainly one that didn't make me go wow. I liked kind of being in at the time, but now that I'm a few weeks out of it, I can't say I have any like big lasting impressions of the story. So yeah, it was like a 3.5, like it was like a 3.5 to 4 stars. It was good. I think if you like the dark academia genre and aesthetic, maybe you will like this one. I say this is more maybe like a starting point, might be a good starting point for dark academia, because I think it's a little bit mild, and maybe from there you go on to some of like the ones that are like more like proper dark academia, like The Secret History and stuff like that, maybe, I'm not sure. And then I moved on to a little bit of a Regency romance, and I read The Wallflower Wager by Tessa. This is the third book in the Girl Meets Duke series, which I really, really enjoy, and this is the last book at the moment. There's another book that's coming out next year, which I'm really looking forward to. And we are following a young woman called Penelope who lives alone with just basically a menagerie of animals in her house. She's a very kind soul, very compassionate, and she just loves looking after animals and taking care of them and kind of keeping other people out while taking a lot of animals in. And she she ends up butting heads with her new neighbor Gabriel when he realizes that the house that he has bought, he's basically bought this house to flip it, and when he realizes that he might have some trouble selling it on at a profitable price when people see like the lady next door like feeding her pet goat out on the green outside. Like, people don't want to be living beside a house that has sheep and a pig and cows and all sorts, you know. And she also has some things going on with her family where she's going to have to find new homes for some of her animals. So her and Gabriel end up, even though like they butt heads, they end up teaming up together to kind of try and find some suitable homes for some of her animals who she loves very dearly. And the two of them have like a lot of chemistry. They're very, very attracted to each other. And obviously like things get a little bit steamy now and again between the two of them. Really, really enjoyed this one. One of the things I love about this book is the female friendship between all the girls in the series is really, really lovely. They always come into each other's books and we see them support each other and be there for one another whenever they want, which I really, really like. But one of the things I actually love about the book, which is more prevalent with each book that goes on because you have another guy like being added to the mix, is the friendship between all like the male characters. So you've Ash from the first book, and I can't remember the guy in the second book's name at the moment, but the two of them come in and they're obviously very protective of Penelope, who's this character as well. So they're kind of being a little bit like, you know, protective of her and being a little bit like antagonistic towards Gabriel, but then they end up having like a little bit of like a bromance eventually, and it's just so funny to watch. There is a scene, it's just so funny to read. There's a scene in this where they end up having to be like midwives to a goat who was giving birth, and it is probably one of the funniest scenes that like I have read in a really long time. It was very, very funny. This one is like a really strong 4.5 out of 5 stars for me. I had a really nice time reading it, and I'm really looking forward to eventually the fourth and final book in the series. And between now and then I might try and pick up a few more Tessa Dare books to read, because I do really enjoy her writing and her characters and her romances. So yeah. And then I picked up a chunky book, and that was Jade War by Fonda Lee. I read Jade City in January, so I'm kind of impressed I've already gotten to Jade War. Like, that's 2 down, only 1 to go. So as I said, in Jade City we are in a fantasy world, but this is very urban fantasy, very like Asian inspired fantasy. And we are on this kind of small island that used to be colonized by its bigger neighbor, but they ended up rebelling and they've gotten like their country back years ago. And all the characters in this book, it would have been their grandfathers who would have led that rebellion. And while there is a government and there is a royal family in this country, the main power is wielded by the mafia clans, of which there are 2 main ones. There is the Mountain Clan and then there is the No Pillar Clan, and we are following the characters in the No Pillar Clan. And in this country as well, there is a specific stone called jade that is mined, and when jade is wielded by a certain race of people, most of those are in the people in this clan, in these clans, these mafia clans, it basically gives them like special powers. It basically makes them stronger, it makes them faster, it makes them be able to kind of perceive people's emotions better. But you have to kind of fighting and taking someone's jade is a sign of strength, and the amount of jade you wear on your body at any one time shows how strong you are and is like a real show of strength. But then people can also kind of get mad from jade. Jade can like cause sicknesses where people will literally like it make them start to go mad. And then other people who aren't this particular race, if they touch jade, it will also send them mad. And so yeah, jade is like this like real strange kind of entity, and in this book we kind of see where other countries are trying to figure out how they can use jade for their own advantage. There is particular kind of like medicine you can take that can mean that you can wield jade, but no one could do it the way the characters in our clans can. And we are following this particular like family, as I said, as they are basically just trying to like hold on to their rule of the city. And in the first book we saw like changes in leadership happen. We see people who didn't expect to lead end up having to rise up and become the leader, and we see as this progresses and we see as they mature into leaders in this book. I just really, really enjoyed this. This one takes place over about 5 years, where I think the first one took place over about 1 year. So I really felt like I was like part of these characters' lives. I felt like they were part of me, and when I stopped reading I felt a little bit bereft that I wasn't with them anymore. So I don't know what the hell I'm going to feel like when I read the last book, because I think that takes place over 20 years. So I might end up going into like a book coma after that one, because I will probably never want to like leave these characters. I will say the depth of the writing and the depth of the world building in this book is absolutely amazing. Like, it's hard to believe that this isn't real, like this isn't a real country, that these aren't real people, this isn't a real like political like a political thing that's happening. Like, it's just crazy. Like, it feels so real and so realized, and I think Fonda Lee is just such a talented writer. Like, I think what she has done with these books is absolutely amazing, and I cannot recommend them enough. They are really, really good. So yeah, this was a 5 out of 5 stars. Really, really enjoyed it, and I cannot wait to read the third book. But I'm also really, really scared about what will happen, because this is the kind of series that like anyone could die at any one time. There's like no mercy given, so I'm a little bit apprehensive of the next one in case one of my favorite characters is like killed off, but I also want to see what happens. So yeah, I finished my audiobook, which was Rachel's Holiday by Marian Keyes. This is the second book in the Walsh family series. We're following Rachel Walsh, who after an accidental drug overdose in New York, her family bring her home to Ireland and put her into this rehabilitation centre called the Cloisters for 3 weeks at first, and then if she wants to stay longer, she can stay longer. And Rachel is really like, she's really against this. The first, she kind of goes along thinking that, oh, she'll like see maybe like loads of famous people in the Cloisters, and it'll be like just one big kind of like spa treatment. She can get massages and, you know, get like facials and stuff like that. She's like, okay, I guess I'll do it. But she's really adamant. Like, she's like, she's not a drug user, or she's not a drug abuser. Like, she only takes drugs now and again. It's only just for a little bit of fun. She doesn't have a problem. Like, she's not addicted, and she's very, very much in denial about her drug usage. So this book is just very, very funny. We see Rachel, you know, really be like, have this particular like idea about herself, and then slowly she starts to realize the truth as she stays a little bit longer in the Cloisters and sees like other people around her, sees their stories, and then starts getting some home truths from her own friends and family about how she's acted, and she kind of really thinks about what she's been doing over the past few years and what she's been doing to herself, and where all of this stems from as well, why she is the way she is. So yeah, I did really enjoy this one. I know this one is like a real favourite when it comes to Marian Keyes books. People always talk about Rachel's Holiday, and I can see why. It is like just a really funny, laugh out loud type of book. There are, of course, some parts of it that are definitely dated. I think that's the same with a lot of Marian Keyes' earlier works. Like, there are some statements by the characters now and again that would kind of make you raise your eyebrows, especially I think if you're not from Ireland or you don't know Irish humour. Like, a lot of Irish humour is very like deadpan, but like, I was reading some of the bits in Rachel's Holiday, and I could see why, like, I could be like ha ha ha, but then I know someone else reading it from like maybe a different country, or someone who doesn't know Irish humour, they could be like, oh my god, that is like one of the worst things I've ever, like, that's really offensive. So yeah, I would be interested to see like what other people sometimes think about some of the things that Rachel was saying and some of the jokes she was making and stuff like that. And there is some things around like kind of fat phobia, and yeah, in this book as well, like there are some characters who are dealing with eating disorders, both in terms of restriction and then binge eating as well in the book. And there are some kind of jokes and like kind of things said that I think might rub some people up the wrong way as well, if you don't like reading about those things. So yeah, but overall I did actually really enjoy this one. I liked how it ended up, and I'm kind of keen to continue on with the Walsh family series and kind of continue on and get to know each sister. I gave this a 4 out of 5 stars, and I enjoyed it. I picked up a book for the Laura in the Books Patreon book club, and that was Our Wives Under the Sea by Julia Armfield. This is kind of like a literary horror book where we are following two characters Mary and Leah, who are a married couple, and we are kind of seeing a before and after. We are seeing a before where Leah is she is kind of like a biologist, and she does research dives in submarines, and we see as she goes down on the submarine and all the power goes off in it and just keeps like sinking down into this like really deep trench, and her 2 other colleagues are kind of like stuck on the submarine like really deep into the ocean, and they don't know what to do. And then we are seeing Mary deal with the fact that Leah has come home after 6 months being like missing on this trip that she took, this research dive that she took, and she is herself, but she's also not herself, and it kind of feels like she has become completely changed by her experience, but also not in totally human ways. Like, it kind of seems there are things happening to her that are a little bit like, you know, like monstrous in a way, and Mary is trying to figure out how to deal with this. Like, she is kind of supposed to be happy that her wife is back, but also she can't help but think that this is not her wife who is with her, who is living with her anymore, and her real Leah is gone, and she may never come back. There's kind of like a grotesque horror type of story going on, especially when you think about how deep in the ocean Leah was. Like, that kind of really freaks me out when I think about like being that deep in the ocean. Yeah, that's kind of really scary to me when I think about it. But then also there is this like real sadness and this grief in it like of like kind of, I guess, people changing and like growing away from you. In this, it's kind of in a more kind of like monstrous way, but I guess people moving on and people changing and not being the person that you once loved, and having to say goodbye to that person is really, really hard. And also just grief of losing a loved one, and yeah, having to come to terms with that. I didn't like love it, I didn't get like loads out of it, but I can definitely appreciate the beauty in the writing, and that like kind of sad, kind of chilling feeling that the book gave me. So I gave it a 3 out of 5 stars. And then I read a book that is probably one of my favourites I've read so far this year, and that is Romancing Mr Bridgerton by Julia Quinn. And this is the 4th book in the Bridgerton story, and this is following Penelope and Colin. But in this one, it's kind of interesting because this one takes place like pretty much 10 years after the first Bridgerton book takes place. So in this one, we are seeing Penelope, who's 28 years old now. She is kind of like, she's like really like kind of like off the shelf now. She's like, people think she's way too old to get married. She is a spinster now. So she kind of just attends the balls to be a chaperone to her younger sister, who is kind of marriageable age now. And ever since she was like 16, 17 years old, she's been in love with Colin Bridgerton. And we see Colin come back from his travels, and he's always been friendly with Penelope because she is friends with his sister Eloise, and he's always just been really nice to her because he's always felt a little bit sorry for her in that she has never really gotten that much attention from people. But then when he comes back from his travels, he kind of like talks to her a little bit more, and he suddenly starts seeing her in a completely different light. He kind of realizes how intelligent she is, but also how beautiful she is, and now that she's kind of been left to her own devices, and in terms of like even styling herself, dressing herself better, things like that, and like being able to be herself a lot more, we see the true her connect with Colin, and Colin like is really enamored by her, but he's also really confused. He's like, I've known Penelope for so long, why is it only now that like I'm seeing her, like that I feel like I'm seeing her for the first time? And their relationship is just like so gorgeous. I just absolutely loved it. I loved seeing that, like it's like the most perfect. I'm not like a big like, when it comes to tropes, I would be a lot more of like an enemies to lovers fans than a friends to lovers fans. But this book is the most perfect example of a gorgeous friend to lovers storyline that I just absolutely loved it. I also think if you like writing or like creative in some way like that as well, you would appreciate this book, because both Colin and Penelope are really talented writers in different ways. I won't say anything more than that, but we see that kind of be something that like they can talk about and they connect with, they connect to each other with. And there are also some other secrets in this book in terms of like Lady Whistledown and stuff that you see revealed, and you see how it comes to light, which will be interesting to see if they do anything about that in the series. When it comes out on television, because this Colin and Penelope are going to be the next relationship that they do for the television series. So they're skipping over Benedict and they're going to go to Colin and Penelope. So it'll be interesting to see what they do in the TV show around Lady Whistledown, if they do anything like what they did in the book. But yeah, we'll see. But I just love this one. I just had such a good time reading it. So I had to give it a 5 out of 5 stars. I just really, really enjoyed it. And then the last book that I read, I technically finished this in March, but I don't want to have it as part of my Irish readathon because it's not an Irish book. I requested this after watching It's a Sin. I think I watched it on Netflix, but it was originally on Channel 4, I think, which is a show around just a young group of people living in London in the 80s and how the AIDS epidemic affected them in different ways. And the character of Jill in It's a Sin is actually inspired by this real Jill Nalder, who was friends with the man who wrote and created It's a Sin. Jill grew up, she went to like kind of a, I guess, stage school or like school like for acting, and she met a bunch of great friends through that, and she moved to London and moved in with a bunch of her friends, and they were all kind of part of the theatre and the arts like lifestyle, and their careers. They were all actors or producers or directors in some way. And we see Jill talk about her friendships and just the laughs and the amazing times that they had. But then as kind of the 80s, as they kind of get like into their they kind of leave college and start like making their way into the world, they start hearing about this mystery illness that seems to affect gay men. And obviously that is the AIDS epidemic, which we know a lot more about now. But she kind of talks about how like the fear of it, the fear and the stigma of AIDS, and how it really like affected their lives in so many different ways. Living and working in the West End as well at the time, she says like, you know, there were boys that would just disappear. They would go home and people would know exactly what they meant. They would just, you know, there was times where they were going to like 3 or 4 funerals a week because of the men who were dying. And there are a few like really close friendships that she documents in this book, of men who got AIDS and who fought for a really, really long time and showed such strength, like in the face of this like such a really scary illness. So yeah, this is a really powerful book. I think it's a book that's like, it's so sad. It will make you cry. I definitely like had tears in my eyes reading some of the chapters in this, but there's also just like so much love and warmth in this book as well, like Jill talking about her friends and like bringing them back to life in the pages of this book and describing who they were to her and what type of people they were. It's just so lovely. And then also it's just really interesting hearing about the West End at that time. Like it obviously was, it really affected the West End, like all these amazing people who could have gone on to do such amazing things, who their lives were cut short so tragically. And we also see how like the West End you know, came together to try and raise funds and stuff like that. That was really interesting. And also just in terms of like, if you're someone who like likes the West End or likes theatre in some way, you might just be really interested in reading this book and seeing what it was like to like live and work in the theatre at this time. It would have been, I think it would be really interesting for people who were like West End fans. So it's just a really, really lovely book. I would really, really recommend it to people, and I had to give it a 5 out of 5 stars because like I couldn't not. It was just such a lovely book. So yeah, I really, really recommend it to people. But I would say to keep a tissue close by in case you do cry during it. But yeah, I really enjoyed reading it, if that is the right word to describe my reading experience. But yeah, so those are all the books that I read in February. Another jam-packed month. So yeah, I think March will probably be the same. So yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. If you guys have read any of these books or have any comments to make, please leave them down below. I always love to chat. Thank you guys so much for watching as always, and I'll see you guys again next time. Bye.